Hello and welcome to the Compost Education Centre. My name's Alora.
And I'm Jeffrey, and we work here at the CEC, which is located on the traditional homelands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, specifically the Esquimalt and Songhees nations. Lekwungen means place to smoke herring.
The Compost Education Centre is a place to learn about compost, gardening, sustainability, and soil health. We offer all kinds of workshops and programs to schools, daycares, and to the public. We might have even visited your school before. Today, we're going to talk to you about native bees and pollination. You might already know that bees are a really important part of our ecosystem. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about why that is and what you can do to support them. Have you ever heard of the word pollination before? The reason bees are such important parts of our ecosystem is because they're pollinators. But to understand what a pollinator is, first we have to explore what exactly is pollination.
Pollination is when pollen from one flower makes its way to another flower. And this is what allows plants to create seeds, which can grow into new plants. Here's a great example of pollination happening right in front of us. Do you notice how this bee is crawling around on the yellow center of this cosmos flower? It's picking up lots of sticky yellow pollen. Then, when it flies over and lands on the second cosmos flower, that second flower will receive the pollen from the first one. That's pollination. Here's an example of a lupin in flower. The flowers have been pollinated and lots of them have begun to turn into seed pods with little seeds inside. They might look sort of familiar, like pea pods, and that's because peas are seeds too. These seeds will fall to the ground and each one can grow into a new lupin plant in the spring.
A pollinator is any animal that moves pollen from one flower, like this one here, to another flower on the same plant or even a different plant. Lots of different animals can be pollinators, like wasps, flies, moths, butterflies, lizards, and even bears and humans. Even though lots of creatures can pollinate, bees are the best pollinators. They love hanging out on flowers because they give them their favorite foods, nectar and pollen. Having bees around ensures that the plants we grow in our gardens, on our farms, and in nature will be pollinated and can continue their life and create fruit and seed. Without bees to pollinate flowers, lots of plants wouldn't be able to come back each spring.
This sunflower is still producing pollen and attracting bees with its bright yellow petals. Here you can see the yellow powdery pollen that comes out of it. This sunflower has already been pollinated, so it's lost all of its petals. It's beginning to make seeds that will fall to the ground and make new sunflower plants in the spring.
Now that we've learned a little bit about pollination, and we learned that bees are the most important pollinators, let's dive in a little deeper to the topic of bees. I want everyone to stop for a second and think about what words you associate with bees. When you think about bees, what comes to mind? I bet that lots of you thought of the words honey and maybe hive, and those words are very closely associated with honeybees. But did you know that honeybees aren't originally from this continent and that they were brought over from Europe?
Honeybees were brought here from Europe because people wanted them to make things like honey and beeswax, and they don't usually live in the wild. Honeybees need humans to look after them. You can think of them kind of like other farm animals like sheep or cows. They're managed and taken care of by bee farmers. So if honeybees aren't from here, did there used to be no bees in North America before they arrived?
Great question. There are actually a ton of bees who have lived in North America for a very long time. In fact, there are over 4,000 species, 400 of which are from right here in BC. These bees are an example of a native species.
So what is a native species? A native species is one that's lived in the same region for a very long time. They're super interconnected to each other. Many native species rely on each other and are beneficial to each other. There are native plants, fungi, animals, even native bacteria. The thing is, native bees are very different from honeybees. Native bees don't live in hives and they don't make honey. Let's take a look at some native bees and learn a little bit about why they're so important.
Native bees in BC are mostly all solitary bees. You can probably guess that this means that they live by themselves. Solitary bees make nests for themselves in the ground, in hollow stems, or holes in trees. What's really cool about solitary native bees is that most of them spend about 11 months of the year in their nests, in the larva and cocoon stage, before they become adults. Let's take a look at some mason bee cocoons. Mason bees are native and nest above ground, often in holes, trees, or sometimes even in homes made by people. They spend most of the year developing inside these cocoons before they emerge in the spring as adults.
Some people, like our friend Jim, keep mason bees as a way to help their flowers grow and to educate people on their interesting lives. Jim will clean these mason bee cocoons to make sure they're free of diseases, then carefully store them at the right temperature over the winter. In the spring, he'll set them back outside and they'll hatch into adult mason bees. Taking care of some bees this way is really helpful for people who want to learn about their life cycles, and it can also be helpful for the flowers that they pollinate. One of the mason bee's favorite flowers are the bright yellow blossoms of the Oregon grape plant, which is a native plant you may recognize by its shiny, spiky leaves.
Another really interesting native bee is the leafcutter bee. The leafcutter bee has a really unique way of making nests. It cuts out small pieces of leaves and rolls up those leaf pieces into a tube shape. Then it lays its eggs inside the rolled up leaves, which helps protect the young bees until they emerge as adults. Because these native bees only spend 1 month as adults, they work really hard when they emerge from their cocoons to collect pollen for their young. And while they're doing that, they pollinate so many plants. Some bees, like bumblebees, collect the pollen on their hind legs, but mason bees and leafcutter bees collect it on their bellies by flopping straight onto a flower and getting it covered in pollen.
Do you remember how collecting pollen helps the plants? When bees get pollen on their bodies, some of it will fall onto another flower, which helps the plant complete its life cycle and make seeds and fruits, like these snowberries. Native bees and native plants have relationships that go back many, many years, and their well-being is deeply interconnected. Native bees also pollinate many of the non-native plants we grow for food, like these apple trees, for example. This pollinator may look like a bee, but look again, it's actually a hoverfly. It uses its bright yellow and black stripes to trick predators into thinking it's a bee or a wasp so it won't get eaten. It's actually harmless and can't sting or bite. You can tell it's a fly and not a bee because it has very short antennae. Even though it isn't a bee, the hoverfly is still a very important native pollinator. Here's one more bee fact that we thought you might find kind of interesting. Did you know that bees can't see the color red? Imagine what a flower garden would look like if you couldn't see the color red. Just like bees, you'd probably be most drawn to other colors of flowers, like yellow, blue, pink, or purple. Even though they're unable to see red, bees can actually see some colors that humans can't see. It's fun to imagine what a patch of flowers would look like if you could see a bunch of extra colors.
Unfortunately, many of us don't know how to protect native bees, and they need our help. Do you have any ideas of how you can support them? A couple things you can do are, 1, plant a variety of native plants, or talk to your parents, family, or teacher about doing this. Growing native plants will increase the amount of food for native bees and help them survive.
2, leave some parts of your garden undisturbed. Some native bees like to nest in the ground or in rotting logs, so if you dig up your garden every year, you might disturb the bees.
3, don't use pesticides in your yard. They can kill native bees or kill the plants that feed native bees.
4, If you see a weed like a dandelion in your yard, let it finish flowering before pulling it out of the ground. Many of the plants that we consider weeds are actually very helpful to a hungry bee.
5. Make a bee bath like this out of stones and a shallow dish. Bee baths provide bees with a source of drinking water. Well, we hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about bees today. Maybe you can share some of what you've learned with your friends and family so we can all know a little bit more about these super important creatures and how we can support them. And feel free to stop by the Compost Education Centre anytime. Our garden's open year-round and there's always lots to look at and explore.